Oh, hello to everyone. You can hear me, right? Yes. Okay, so my name is Nickolay Tabah. I work for a Ben-Zvi Institute in Jerusalem and have affiliation to Haifa University. Um, well, my PhD is Israel Studies. So the last two and a half years, I changed a little bit my subject. So it's my first presentation about something. Where I argue that I will give you a small explanation for the Israel antisemitism and the ideological clash. So I will present you a new theoretical framework that I think can be applied. So why have Jews generated unusually intense reactions across radically different societies and ideologies? I think everyone asks this question for himself. So throughout recorded history, Jews have generated reactions that seem disproportionate to their demographic, military, or political power. These reactions emerge in radically different historical and worlds. Yes, we know that it started even in the pagan world, at least according to some scholars. Christianity, Islam, we see it in 19th century nationalism arrived, Nazism, of course, communism, and the contemporary anti-Zionism. And my argument today is that these reactions cannot be explained only through ordinary xenophobia or minority tensions. Rather, they reflect recurring confrontations with what I call the Jewish idea, and I will explain shortly. Uh, it's a distinctive civilizational framework carrying theological, moral, historical, and universal claims. And in modernity, many of these reactions increasingly focus not only on Jews as individuals, but on Israel as a sovereign embodiment of the Jewish idea. So how should we explain these recurring reactions? There are broadly two major explanatory traditions in anti-Semitism studies. The first emphasizes contextual explanations: economic crisis, political instability, nationalism, social tensions, minority dynamics, as you can see on the slide. On the other side, we have civilizational explanations, if it's of Wistrich or Nuremberg, and it can be explained by religion and theology, or maybe a moral challenge, Jewish distinctiveness, or maybe competing worldviews. And my argument today is not that the one explanation replaces the other. Rather, historical context activate deeper symbolic and ideological tensions surrounding the Jewish collective. And what I mean by that, to understand the argument, we need to briefly return to the ancient world. Drawing partially on the work of Yechezkel Kaufman, a great scholar, you can look at it in one of his books in English, Religion of Israel from its beginnings to the Babylonian exile. So the Jewish idea represented a profound rupture with pagan civilization. That's what he believed. And the pagan world was, we know that he was pluralistic, but in a very different sense. We had many gods, local cults, cyclical time, and religion tied to tribe and or empire. And the Jewish worldview introduced radically different assumptions: one universal God, history with purpose, moral sovereignty, and covenantal ethics, and the belief that truth transcends tribe and empire. This was not merely a new religion, it was a new way to structure and perceive reality. So why was the Jewish idea so disruptive, and was it disruptive? Why did these seemingly theological ideas provoke such powerful reactions? Because they fundamentally challenge the assumptions upon which the pagan world was built. If there is only one God, then every other God is false. That was not simply a religious disagreement, it delegitimized the entire religious order of the ancient world. If morality comes from a transcendent God, then kings, emperors, and political power are no longer the ultimate source of authority. Even rulers became subject to moral judgment. They are under God. If history is linear rather than cyclical, then history has purpose. The existing political and religious order is no longer eternal or inevitable. It can be judged and eventually replaced. And if one particular people is entrusted with a covenantal mission, then that people acquires a unique historical significance. The Jews become more than just another ethnic group. They become carriers of a universal moral message. This combination of universal moral claims with enduring collective particularity made Judaism unlike any surrounding pagan tradition. In that sense, the Jewish idea was not simply different. It was in potential when and if being noticed, and not always it was being noticed, civilizationally disruptive. So of course, this transformation did not happen overnight. For several centuries, Judaism remained one people among many within the Hellenistic world. In many places, it attracted curiosity, but many times indifference or limited local tensions rather than systematic hostility. Gradually, however, the Jewish idea became increasingly visible throughout the Mediterranean. Jewish diaspora communities flourished in major centers such as Alexandria, Rome, and Babylon. We are talking about after the destruction of the first temple. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek made Jewish the Septuagint. Sorry for my perfect English. The translation of the Hebrew Bible made Jewish ideas accessible to a much wider audience, while growing number of God-fearers, non-Jews who adopted many Jewish beliefs and practices without fully converting to Judaism, and converts, and there was a lot of converts, by the way, in the Roman Empire, demonstrated that Judaism was attracting followers beyond the Jewish community itself. In other words, Judaism was no longer perceived merely as a religion of a small Eastern people. It increasingly appeared as a worldview capable of extending its influence across the Roman world. This growing visibility produced mixed reactions. Many admired Jewish ethics, monotheism, and communal cohesion. Others, however, became increasingly anxious about Jewish distinctiveness and influence. Roman authors began portraying Jews as separatist, subversive, and even hostile to surrounding civilization. We begin to see accusations that also expressed in the language of antiquity, and they will echo through later history. As the Roman philosopher Seneca, I hope I say his name correct, observed in the 1st century CE, the customs of this accursed race have regained such influence that they are now received throughout all the world. We can feel it a little bit, maybe now we feel the same thing. What is striking about Seneca's remark is that he was not reacting simply to the existence of Jews as a minority. He was reacting to the growing spread and perceived influence of Jewish ideas. So what are the recurring patterns of reaction? What is striking historically is not only the persistence of hostility, but the repetition of specific symbolic accusations. Jews are repeatedly accused of dual loyalty, conspiracy, misanthropy, subversion, domination, and moral corruption. The surrounding ideologies change, yet the symbolic structure often remains surprisingly stable. The Jews become the outsider, the destabilizer, the threat to the existing moral or political order. And Jean-Paul Sartre captured this dynamic in his essay in 46. And he wrote, if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. And if I understand him correctly, he understood antisemitism not primarily as a response to actual Jews, but as a symbolic construction serving ideological needs. So, and of course, with the arrival of Christianity and Islam, both, of course, inherit major elements of the Jewish tradition. Both adopt belief in one God, biblical revelation, ethical monotheism, and the conviction that history unfolds toward the divine purpose. But inheritance often produces rivalry. Christianity universalized Jewish monotheism while advancing the doctrine of superstition, the belief that church inherits God's covenant and places Israel as a true people of God. Islam similarly incorporates biblical traditions while presenting itself as a final and complete revelation. Thus, Judaism becomes simultaneously ancestor, competitor, and a continuing theological challenge. The Jewish collective remains symbolically central, even when politically marginal. Its continued existence raised an unavoidable question for both traditions. If God's covenant has truly passed to a new community, what is the continuing significance of the Jewish people? The rivalry, the reform, was never merely political or social. It was fundamentally a struggle over who truly embodied God's universal message and the direction of human history. If we jump a few centuries forward and go to modern ideologies, so in modernity the language changes, but the symbolic structure often persists. Nazism racialized from race, the Jewish question. Soviet anti-Zionism reframes Jews throughout the language of cosmopolitanism and bourgeois corruption, imperialism, and conspiracy. And Islamist discourse combines older theological motifs with modern anti-colonial and revolutionary narratives. These ideologies are not identical. Their goals, assumptions, and historical contexts are profoundly different. What they share is a recurring symbolic function assigned to Jews. Across these very different worldviews, Jews, and increasingly the state of Israel, are portrayed not simply as political opponents, but as the principal obstacle to the ideal order each ideology promises. And racial purity, proletarian liberation, Islamic triumph, or universal justice. In each case, the struggle is ultimately not only against Jews themselves, but against what they are imagined to represent. The vocabulary changes, the symbolic structure remains remarkably familiar. So with Zionism, the Jewish idea re-enters history in a sovereign form. For the first time in nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish idea acquires political sovereignty once again. Israel becomes not merely a state, but the sovereign embodiment of the Jewish idea. Ben-Gurion repeatedly describes the new state in moral and historical terms. He envisioned Israel as a light unto the nations, a society that would combine national renewal with universal moral purpose, at least in theory. That's what we need to go, according to Ben-Gurion. This vision included an exemplary society, the ingathering of exiles, moral pioneering, and a contribution to humanity. Precisely because Israel embodies these aspirations, it also becomes the object of extraordinary symbolic expectations. Israel is praised not only for what it does, but for what it is imagined to represent. Conversely, its critics often judge it through the very same symbolic framework, holding it to exceptional moral expectations rarely applied to other states. Israel thus inherits not only Jewish sovereignty, but also the symbolic centrality long associated with the Jewish peoples themselves. This leads to what I call symbolic exceptionalism. We can see it on both sides. So Israel is no longer perceived simply as one state among many, a normal state, if you can call it. Instead, it becomes invested with extraordinary symbolic meaning. For many of its supporters, Israel represents the realization of the Jewish idea. It is viewed as a uniquely moral society, a model democracy, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty, a people returning to history, and even a state with enduring religious significance, and a mission to contribute to humanity. Just think about it, how many people support Israel, not only because it not only because it have like the best democracy or stuff like that, but they input and believe that what is Israel is representing, and also from the religious reason. For many of its critics, however, Israel comes to represent the opposite, exactly 180 degrees. It is portrayed not merely as a state whose policies deserve criticism, but as the embodiment of colonialism, apartheid, genocide, and even absolute evil. These two narratives are mirror images of one another. One attributes to Israel exceptional virtue, the other attributes to its exceptional vice. Both, however, treat Israel as something far greater than ordinary national state. That is precisely what makes the phenomenon analytically significant. Israel is judged not only for what it does, but for what it is imagined to represent. So what is my broader argument for it? Yes, what is my thesis? Throughout history, reactions to Jews have often reflected more than opposition to a particular people. They reflect recurring confrontations with core elements of what I have called the Jewish idea. So morality, chooseness, universalism, sovereignty, and historical purpose. Of course, on each of it we can talk many hours and disagree. These themes repeatedly generate admiration, resistance, imitation, and rivalry across radically different civilizations and ideologies. In the modern era, Israel becomes the contemporary sovereign embodiment of this idea, of the Jewish idea. As a result, many reactions directed toward Israel continue patterns that long predate the modern Middle East. In my final argument, the final slide. So if this argument is correct, it changes how we understand one of history's oldest phenomena, anti-Semitism, and increasingly the exceptional reactions surrounding Israel, and that cannot always be explained solely by economics, politics, nationalism, or contemporary conflicts that we have. They also reflect an enduring civilizational conversation about morality, sovereignty, universalism, and humanity's vision of history. Israel, therefore, functions not only as a geopolitical actor. It has become a symbolic arena throughout which modern societies continue negotiating their relationship to the Jewish idea. If my argument is correct, then the enduring question is not only why Jews have generated such intense reactions throughout history, it is why the Jewish idea has repeatedly become a focal point throughout which civilizations negotiate their deepest moral, political, and historical questions. The history of anti-Semitism is therefore not only the history of the Jews, it is also the history of civilizations responding to the challenge of the Jewish idea. Thank you. Yes, I think it will be